looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
When did you write that?
I didn't write.
Hey everybody, this is TJR. When the trailer for the motion picture first dropped, I was immediately inspired to make a video entitled What If the Beatles Never Happened? And I mean, I was immediately inspired. I dropped everything I was doing and I just started making that video until it was done the same day, and then I posted it. Now that video got a lot of response. A lot of people made speculative comments about both the movie and about some of the concepts that I brought up in my video. But a lot of people also asked me, are you going to watch the movie and are you going to tell us what you think of it? And I kept saying, oh yeah, sure, you bet I'm going to watch it. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And then the movie came out and I kept trying to catch a screening of it, and for whatever reason, life just got in the way and I couldn't go. Eventually I realized I was going to have to wait until this film came out on Blu-ray and DVD and was available for rental before I could see it. Well, I finally saw it, and yes, I know I'm very, 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 very late to this party. I do apologize, but because I kept saying, yes, I will talk about it, I feel I do have to make this video. Even though within the attention span of the internet, it's been probably about 100 or so years since this movie came out. So did I like this movie? Yes, I really did. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, which is probably going to surprise maybe some people out there who saw my video, What If the Beatles Never Happened? Because in that video, I talked a lot about some of the consequences and possibilities that this movie's concept brings up. The idea that everybody just forgets who the Beatles are except for one person. Oh, and by the way, spoilers, it feels ridiculous that I should say that, but I have to say spoilers. If you haven't seen this movie yet, I am probably going to give away some spoilers. So once again, in my video, I talked a lot about how different the current musical landscape would be without the Beatles. The Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show was a tremendously influential moment for so many of today's now legendary and iconic classic rock artists. It was that moment that inspired them to become a musician, to write songs, and to become a recording artist. The British invasion, as we know it, may not have happened. A lot of people speculated in the comments saying, well, then I guess the Beach Boys would have become the biggest band in the world. I agree that the Beach Boys would have existed in a world without the Beatles, but it was when the Beatles began to embrace much more complex musical arrangements and much more thought-provoking lyrics that Brian Wilson became inspired to meet that bar that they had set and to meet that challenge and record an album like Pet Sounds. Record songs with complex musical arrangements like Good Vibrations, and write and record songs like God Only Knows. And who knows what might have happened had Smile been finished? Who knows what might have happened had Brian Wilson not had the demons that he had? And who knows what he might have musically accomplished without all that? But that's another video for another day. Back when I first talked about that trailer, I said that chances are what we are going to get is just a nice, pleasant romantic comedy with a Twilight Zone-esque motif to propel the story. And that is pretty much what we got. However, the film actually did touch on, however sometimes lightly, some of the more fascinating concepts that the concept of the film brings up. It also, unfortunately, ignores a lot of it too. I don't know if you watched The Needle Drop, but Anthony Fantano made a very good point when the film's trailer first premiered. There is a sequence in that trailer where our main character plays the song Yesterday. This is after the world has forgotten who the Beatles are, and everybody looks at him astonished and says, you know, well, when did you ever write that? That's amazing. And one character says, well, it's not such and such by Coldplay. And he brought up the fact that Coldplay probably wouldn't exist if the Beatles hadn't existed. I would say that if Coldplay did exist without the Beatles, it would be potentially a very different version of Coldplay than the one that we know now. And this is where the film, like I said, just kind of lightly breezes past everything. It does at least have the decency to acknowledge that Oasis didn't exist without the Beatles. And so that was nice that they at least did that. But they did it more as kind of a joke than to make any kind of real serious commentary. It does seem that by and large, the rest of the musical world just happened the way it always had happened before, just minus the Beatles. Which, of course, I would disagree with. I would say that the whole musical landscape would be radically, radically different, more than likely. Now, one thing I will give the film points for is that it does take a little bit of a look at how today's modern music industry might react to these songs if they were presented in the here and now. There's a nice bit of satirical commentary being made here, wherein one character states like, wow, isn't this amazing? Instead of having the same 5 songwriters write all the songs for today's contemporary pop artists, or needing 15 people to write a hit song, or having to have recording artists that always have someone else featured on every single track, we just simply have a person who just sings well, plays well, and writes really good songs. And so this film is basically taking a little bit of a satirical jab at how our current modern music industry is kind of working right now, and says, hey, why don't we just get back to basics? Why don't we just instead sign music artists who are just good at playing and who are good at singing, don't need autotune, and who are just good at writing songs. So you don't have to hire the same 5 songwriters to write all the hits for all the same pop stars. And I do appreciate the fact that the film was willing to make this statement. And it does so with a bit of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, just a little comical jab in the side. Of course, what might have been more interesting would be to see how today's modern music industry might want to recontextualize these songs. And of course, I'm referring to today's modern electronic production, which is what most of the music that gets promoted by today's music industry and by today's terrestrial radio media is about. There might be many comical possibilities by actually showing this in the film, and there also might be really interesting musical possibilities too. Of course, once again, I knew when I saw the trailer that this film, if it ever touched on this at all, would only touch on it lightly, because once again, this film's primary focus is to be a romantic comedy. And as a romantic comedy, the film works perfectly fine. Its 2 main principal actors, Himesh Patel and Lily James, are very good at playing really, really likable people. We can instantly relate to Himesh Patel's portrayal of Jack Malik as this earnest, sincere human being who really just, wants a chance at following his dream about being able to write songs that people will enjoy and present them to the world. He's just so earnest about this, and he's very good at relaying this to general audiences and making us all kind of just sympathize and feel for him. And whether or not you are a songwriter right now, or an aspiring songwriter, or an aspiring musician, or you've secretly wished to be able to do this in your life, or even if you haven't, he's very good at portraying this so that everybody watching pretty much relates to it. The same goes for Lily James in the role of Ellie, who portrays this character who is just very devoted and is, has always been in love with the character of Jack, but Jack just doesn't see it. He likes her, he's good friends with her, he agrees that they had this business relationship, but he sees everything as completely platonic. And while I'm on this subject, I guess I should talk about how this film embraces common tropes for romantic comedies. And I don't talk about romantic comedies on this channel very much. In fact, this is probably the first time I've ever talked about one. But like any genre of films, there are just certain tropes that all genres of films embrace. And no matter how far-fetched they are, we just accept them. We accept that a character like Jack Malik could have a relationship with a woman portrayed by Lily James, this character named Ellie, who is very beautiful, who's very sweet, very devoted, will do anything for him, and yet the guy never even thinks, oh, hey, maybe she'd be a good partner for me. Maybe I should pursue a romantic involvement. This seems like a no-brainer. This seems incredibly dumb that he doesn't. If you want to be really critical, you could say this is a really stupid character. But we just accept that because it's a romantic comedy. And without that, we don't have a romantic comedy. So once again, they're just these tropes that we accept. And of course, it exists in this film too. But at least the film has the humor, the good humor and decency to have another character come out from the audience perspective and say, hey, why aren't you getting involved with her, doggone it? And I'm talking about, there's the one character whose name escapes me. Sorry, I'm not going to stop just to look at IMDb just to check it. But you know who I'm talking about. He's the character that's the roadie, the band roadie, that ends up joining Jack Mellick on this journey that he has. And he says, hey, I don't get this. I mean, if it were me, I wouldn't be letting her slip away. In horror films, it's the, hey, why are you hiding in the room full of sharp objects from the killer? Go hide somewhere else. In romantic comedies, it's, hey, why haven't you realized that this person is the best life partner you could ever ask for? Two different film genres, two different tropes that get repeated a lot. They're very far-fetched, and yet we accept them. Because without them, we don't have the film. I guess the only thing I would complain about this film, and it's a minor complaint, is that early on we find out that the character played by Lily James, Ellie, the Ellie character, first becomes attracted to Jack, the character Jack, when she sees him in school performing an Oasis cover. And there's even a sequence later in the film where our main character remembers that moment from his youth. And I kept thinking, well, wait a minute. We've already established that Oasis does not exist in this version of the world. So what song did she see him playing during his youth? And because the sequence where he remembers this happens much later in the film, like close to the last part of the film, I kept wondering that this might be some important clue to the puzzle as to why all this happened. I kept thinking that he would have to find out from her, well, what song did you see me play? What song did you hear me play back then? What was it? Because it couldn't have been Oasis, because Oasis doesn't exist in this reality. But they ended up not going anywhere with that. And so I kind of think it would have been better if they just made it something else, a Rolling Stones song, anything else but an Oasis song. I also have to really give props to Ed Sheeran. I think he was very good at playing a version of Ed Sheeran. I also have to give him props for being willing to humble himself in this film. I mean, he basically has a line there where he says, I can't compete with this. I can't touch this. I cannot write a song as good as The Long and Winding Road, which is the actual song used in the film. And while these are the songs of the Beatles, while they are celebrated around the world, and while many, fans and both music professors and musicologists will say these are some of the most well-written songs ever in the 20th century, I can't think of too many contemporary music artists, hit makers, that would be willing to say that in a motion picture, be willing to humble themselves in that way in a motion picture. So, hats off to Ed Sheeran. One other thing in this film that really helps to elevate it beyond, say, the traditional romantic comedy, beyond just, of course, this Twilight Zone-esque motif, is that scene near the end where Jack Mellick meets an elderly John Lennon somewhere in his mid to late 70s, and they just have a little conversation. This scene could have also worked had the film chosen not to be a romantic comedy, had it chosen to be a more serious exploration into how different the musical landscape might be without the Beatles, and in how today's music industry might react to that music. This scene would have worked effectively in that type of film as well. And it's a wonderful scene because in it, we find out that John Lennon didn't need to be in the most successful band in the world in order to find personal happiness. We found out that he found happiness in, one, becoming a sailor and sailing around the world, and most importantly, that he found happiness when he met and married the woman that he loved. Now, her name is not mentioned. It's clearly not Cynthia. It's clearly not Yoko. It's probably someone else entirely. It's not important that we know who it is. And yes, I know the film doesn't mention specifically that she passed away, but it's pretty much implied when you watch the film. But even though she has clearly passed away, John Lennon has this sense of fulfillment from his life, that his life was well lived, and that it was mostly well lived by the fact that he met the woman he loved, he married her, and they stayed together until death did they part. And this makes Jack Malek realize what needs to be the most important thing in his life, which is, of course, the character of Ellie. It's a wonderful, beautiful sequence. And of course, if I were making this movie, it wouldn't be a romantic comedy. Instead, it would be that exploration into the what if possibilities. And my movie might be 45 minutes of just the two of them conversing and talking. Not sure how many tickets that would sell, though. Still, I'd love to make that film. So overall, yeah, this was an enjoyable, fun, romantic comedy film, but it has a special extra resonance because it is using the music of, one of the greatest bands in the world and some of the greatest music of the 20th century. Would I watch it again? More than likely, yes. And at the very least, if it was available on Netflix Instant or available for rental, or if I picked it up for rental, I would rewatch at least that sequence with the elderly John Lennon. It's a wonderful sequence. And sometimes with a film, just a couple of really great sequences or one really wonderful sequence at the end, as I said before in this film, is enough to elevate the film to where you like the entire thing a whole lot more than you would have without it. Another thing that I talked about in that original video, What If the Beatles Never Happened, was a concept, a story outline for a story that dealt with a time traveler who went back through time and accidentally erased the Beatles. My story, of course, was more of a tragedy, a kind of a sad, kind of quiet little tragedy. And after watching yesterday, I feel an even stronger impulse now more than ever to try to put that story down on paper. I'm just not a fiction writer. I've not really attempted to write any fiction since I was very young, and those attempts were extremely juvenile. I'm not sure if I'm able to write that story, but I think I should give it a go, or maybe I should find someone to collaborate with on it. Who knows? But at any rate, those are my thoughts on the movie yesterday. What are yours? Please share me your thoughts and opinions. Everybody, thank you for being patient in letting me get to this particular movie, and hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you like what I'm doing, be sure to click like, click subscribe, click notifications so you can know when I release new videos. And if you'd like to help me make more videos, please go to my Patreon page and donate whatever you can. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.